All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the Collision Repair Refinish stage driven by iCar and SCRS. Guys, it's finally just about over. Yeah, SEMA's always a fantastic show. We've had a great show, but I'm ready to be done. I don't know about you guys.
I need to walk a few more miles.
Just a few.
All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about our new course that's coming out, Mixed Attachment Methods. For this course, we needed to put something together that would challenge the technicians. We got some feedback that we needed something that was a little bit more challenging, something that was a little bit more aligned with modern repair procedures and things like that. If we think about this course, and there's a fantastic display right around the corner, but it's a course that brings in things like MIG braze, mag welding, spot welding, rivet bonding, all into one prop, so that we could get into that. So let's, just for a minute, Scott, let's talk a little bit about how does that align with OEMs and the repair procedures and the requirements for today's vehicles?
Well, I don't think there's a repair out there that you're doing a single attachment method anymore. It seems like even some of the simple ones, you're at the very least, you're going to be MIG welding, plug welding, things like that, but you're getting MIG brazing. You're getting rivets where there weren't rivets originally. You're getting adhesive where there wasn't, they're calling out certain spot welds that we can't get access to, that they don't want us heating it up with a weld, so they have crash toughened adhesive in there in the repair procedure. So you're seeing all those kinds of things, and the OEMs have really evolved the repair procedures, and this course, I think, does a terrific job of really kind of giving you that real-world experience with the body repair manual. There's a lot of information in there that you're going to see in repair manuals, and a lot of technicians, I think, don't always go to the repair procedures like they should. They're not looking at them every day, and that's a big problem that we have to fix.
Yeah. So it's definitely something that needs to be fixed. And if we think about this one, Eldon, from an instructor perspective, what's different about this one, right? We have a lot of courses where the techs, if they've got some welding skills, they can probably get through it. But this one's a little different. If they don't come to this one with their skills on point, I think they're going to have some problems.
Yeah, and you're right about that. I mean, they really need to be on point as far as the skill sets. But kind of going back to even what Scott says, making sure that we're looking at that repair procedure and we're following the directions, making sure that we're putting the correct attachments where it's being called for, right? And so it's taking all of that back knowledge from all of the other courses they've taken and actually applying it to this prop.
So when we think about the challenges that some of the folks have had when they've gone through some of the pilot events and training events and things that we've got, everything that I've seen so far, it's really not been skills with welding. It's been more about what you talked about, following the repair procedure and looking at that manual. And at the end of the day, when they're repairing cars out in the field, they need to be able to review, understand, and follow the repair procedures, right?
That is correct, and one thing that we're really focusing on as we're delivering this is, we got repair planning, but there's another thing called repair mapping, and actually mapping out what am I going to do on this repair, identifying these different attachments, and giving yourself, just a simple visual indicator, that this is going to be a MIG braze joint, or this is going to be a steel GMA weld, or, am I in a auto set or a manual set, those types of things. Because as we get into that repair, oftentimes we're just kind of get into that mode of doing, and we're not really processing what we should be doing.
Yeah, so this one, like I said, we've managed to put together a prop and a challenge with these techs where they've got all of these different attachment methods all on a single prop. So we're not suggesting that they're going to have all of these attachment methods on any single panel or on every panel that they're putting together, but we could show many examples of, for example, when I go out and do presentations about this, I use an OEM procedure where they're requiring 13 different unique attachment methods on one trunk floor, right? So now it's, let's talk a little bit. You went through it, Scott. You went through but the manual itself. We've done things to make the manual more realistic and more like an OEM manual. Just talk a little bit about the importance of that.
Well, I think that, it really reflects what the OEMs do. And a lot of times the OEM manuals, there's translations that are being done. And so they try to limit the amount of words on it. They try to do a lot more images and things like that. So you're not going to have a paragraph of text explaining every little thing you have to do and everything you have to watch out for. They try to keep it extremely simple. A couple little call outs and things like that. And if you're not taking all that you've learned and all the different areas that we've trained on, you're going to struggle on this one. You have to really be thinking about that because there's so many little nuances that if you're not paying attention to what's in that manual, there might be in an OEM procedure, there could just be a little footnote that calls out something. We're talking about the different kinds of welds. Honda's a great example. In one spot, they'll have you be MIG brazing a single hole, and then you're MIG brazing a double hole weld there, and then over here you're doing a manual set spot weld, and then the very next one it can be an auto set spot weld, and so just mapping all that out and understanding it, this prop is your opportunity to really stop and think about some of that stuff. And I think this is something that technicians before they take it should really stop and kind of prepare themselves mentally and should be doing all these kinds of things in their daily life. We don't talk about mapping out the repair because it's fun. It's something you need to be doing because when you're in the middle of it and you have adhesives drying and you're doing all these things, that's not the time to be figuring out I don't have the right tips on the spot welder. I don't have the right SPR or blind rivets available. And now the adhesive's curing and there's all kinds of things. Or I put the wrong spot weld or a wrong MIG braze in the wrong location, and now how did you affect that repair? We don't know. So this prop is really driving that point home, I think, and I think that if you don't have to struggle with it if you do those little things and plan it out.
So I'm glad you brought up the manual spot weld thing because that's something else that students need to be prepared for when they come into this course, right? Because they have to be able to get to the manual settings for spot welds, right? I've had a number of folks that have said, well, why do I need to be able to get to manual spot welds? My machine it's a smart welder. I just pull the trigger and it does the weld for me. But when you have those manufacturers like Honda that say you have to do this using manual set so that they are verifying, time, pressure, all that kind of stuff, it's important. They need to understand this before they come to the class. So another thing you touched on, Scott, was the training that they have in advance of coming to this event. So let's talk a little bit about that. And I know, Eldon, you're out there doing this kind of training. There's nothing in this course, mixed attachment methods, that they haven't already been through with our hands-on training, right?
That is correct, and a real good example is actually in the spot welding class, understanding how to get that equipment, into a manual setting because so many shops just rely on those auto sets, right? And another example for me is oftentimes, proper shunting, isolation of our clamps. Are we performing those steps as we're supposed to? As we go through that repair procedure, for this mixed attachment prop, it doesn't tell us to shunt, but that's knowledge that we should know and we should be applying it as we're doing this repair.
Yeah, but it's knowledge they would have gotten from taking the courses that lead up to this, right? Because this course, and we should make that clear, this course is going to replace the recertification for steel sectioning. It's not a course it's not something somebody's going to take right out of the box the first time they go through steel sectioning. This is the recertification. Once they've already been through all of our hands-on training for spot welding, MIG brazing, mag welding, rivet bonding. They will have gone through hands-on training for all of those, along with all of our online training that leads to those hands-on events before they come into this. So it's nothing new. It's something that they should already have these skills for. But I think we're seeing that some of the folks that come in just need to make sure that they really have their skills on point.
Exactly, and we kind of see, in the hands-on classes, we have the skills validation and that kind of stuff. But it really is important that they take that knowledge and glean it and actually apply it to this. So, yeah, so taking, like you said, that previous knowledge and applying it, that's critical.
So, Scott, you went through, you were one of the original guinea pigs that went through the original part of this from a technician's perspective, somebody that's gone through this, what did you find unique? What was challenging?
I think, you know, the hidden reinforcements, I think, is the thing that is going to trip people up, because that's what trips them up on a real vehicle. You know, they're using a cutoff wheel or an air saw, and they're going too deep with it, and it's one of those things that these panels are stacked up so tightly together, and sometimes there's not a lot of gap, and you have to really look at some of those tips and tricks that you've, you know, seen and heard over the years. You have to kind of apply them all. You know, whether it's how you control how deep you go removing a spot weld, how you know, to control that air saw so you're not going deep and cutting a reinforcement, because on a vehicle, if you cut it, you basically, you could have to rip the whole side of the car apart, or you could maybe even total the vehicle out because you damaged something that's not replaceable. And so, you know, this test does a really good job of making sure that that is something that you have to pay attention to, because if you damage it, just like in a real vehicle, you know, it's no longer a viable repair.
So, Eldon, what kind of things are you guys seeing when somebody is struggling to get through this course? What kind of things are you seeing them struggle with?
Well, there's obviously the skill set, you know, and so some individuals, you know, need to really brush up on that skill set of mag welding and that kind of stuff. You know, the other portion really is following those directions, making sure that we're putting those attachments where they're supposed to be. You know, kind of going back to what Scott was saying, you know, making sure that when we're making those cuts, we're not cutting too deep, using the proper tool for the job. You know, there's a section in there where we're removing some thicker material from some thinner material, and we found several people having challenges to where they're not actually grinding deep enough and removing them spot welds, and when they go to separate it, they actually tear the material behind. You know, so.
Well, I think too that with this is another one where they have to slow down to speed up, and it's something that they want to get through something. They want to get the job out the door. They want to get it done. If you just take your time and actually look at the procedure, take your time and think about, okay, well, what do I have to pay attention to? What can I do to control this? That, I think, is going to be one of the things that will help you be successful in it. Because if you're just trying to hurry up, you're going to fall farther behind.
Yeah, the slow down and go faster thing makes sense, right? In our pilot event, we had 4 technicians in there, and one of the technicians was very junior compared to the other technicians in the group and was going a little bit slower. And at one point, some of the other techs were giving him a hard time about being slower. He actually did probably the best of all the 4 people that were in the training because he took his time. He didn't get overly aggressive with the belt sander. He didn't damage anything in the backside. So it all, you know, is important there. I think there's another thing we should talk about too. One of the things that we changed with this course, in the past, anybody that was taking an ICAR welding certification course, there was no instructor guidance. There was no ability to train, and we've changed that with this course, right? So with this one, we allow the instructor to train and coach until the student starts that particular attachment method on the prop. So if they're getting to the point that they're doing spot welding, they can get training and assistance and coaching on practice pieces until they get to the point that they're applying spot welds to the prop. Have you seen that make a difference for the students? Does it help with them?
Yeah, I've seen a huge difference with that. You know, and it kind of comes to the students or the instructor encouraging the students to ask those questions. You know, making sure that the equipment settings are correct, making sure that, you know, we're providing that training, that guidance on that scrap material, so that when they do get to the prop, that they're doing it correctly.
I think it's important, right? Because we've talked for years, I think, even within the walls of ICAR and externally, that if we send an instructor in and they're working with a technician that's struggling to pass the certification, but we can't provide any coaching, when we leave, more than likely that technician's still going to be struggling, and he's still going to weld on somebody's car tomorrow. So I think this is a step in the right direction for us.
Yeah, and I think, you know, a lot of the people on my team, they came from the shop. They were in that environment, and depending on the shop culture, it can be very looked down upon to ask a question, to maybe go a little bit slower. And I think that's something that a lot of technicians need to kind of start getting past that. It's okay to ask a question. It's okay to have somebody come and go, hey, does this look right to you in their day-to-day work? And no different here. So like that coaching and that training piece is really good. But I think that's one of the things that a lot of repair facilities really need to take a look at in the culture of their facility. Are we allowing questions to be asked? Because if you're not, that's going to be a detriment to everyone in the entire repair facility.
You know, and that's one thing that we found even in the training, you know, encouraging students to talk amongst themselves. You know, so even though that we can't really assist when they're doing the certification portion of it, they can actually assist each other, right? So looking over their own work or looking over their coworkers' work, you know, and identifying any of those potential automatic failures or, you know, areas where they need to, you know, maybe do some extra repairs or, you know, go a little further.
Yep. So, I guess we'll get close to wrapping this one up, but before we do, just kind of a closing thought from either one of you on thinking about the technician's prep, right? So when a tech signs up for this, they're going to get a QR code that gives them the ability to download the manual, to see the manual before they come into the training, to understand what's coming in. There will be a prerequisite course, but it'll just be a video that is a what to expect type of video, so they understand, so that they can see some of the things that are going to be required in there, just so that there's not any surprises, so that they don't come to this thinking, okay, I got it, and then they get there and oops, I really don't have it, my skills aren't there. You know, you would really hope that their skills would already be on point, because they were talking about technicians. You would, in theory anyways, the techs that are coming through this course are technicians that are structural technicians doing these types of repairs on vehicles every single day. So we're wanting those kind of people to come in and make sure their skills are on point and ready to go. But just from the two of you that have been through this as either a pilot or you're instructing and teaching people how to do this, just kind of some closing thoughts for any technician that is going to be taking this course. What's your best advice to get prepped and ready to go?
So I think my best advice, you know, in preparation is obviously brush up on skill sets. You know, look at what is going to be required, making sure that our equipment, you know, oftentimes we go into shops and that's actually one of the issues we run into is the equipment's not up to par, you know, making sure that we have extra consumables, you know, contact tips, that kinds of stuff for our spot welder, you know. Some of these spot welders are going to require passwords. So do we have that password to where we can get into the administrative and to get it into the manual settings? You know, them are all kind of the key components, you know, because we do have a limited amount of time to get this recertification done, and we don't want to be wasting that time, you know, on equipment maintenance per se, as to where we can actually be working on the prop.
Scott?
Yeah, so for me, the number one thing I was going to say was maintain your equipment. Don't ignore your maintenance. But, you know, it's okay to practice. It's okay to practice these skills. You should be practicing these skills before you're welding on vehicles, before you're doing that. You know, how many shops out there have a dedicated area to do test welds and actually go through that process and do that? I know there's been a lot of shops I've been to that they don't have anything. They don't ever think about doing it. And it's something that you're not necessarily, as a structural technician, welding every single day. You may not be doing adhesive bonding every single day. You may do it in one job. You may do it, you know, you might be pulling on a car or replacing parts that are just straight welds. But if you're not maintaining things, you're not practicing things, you're not making sure everything's working right, you're going to struggle on this test, and you're going to struggle repairing vehicles. And that's, you know, it's a little bit mind-boggling. Like, we don't have time to do the maintenance. We don't have time to practice. We have time to mess up a repair and then do it again. So I think that this is a great opportunity to help reinforce that point, because, you know, I'm not in the shop at ICAR working on stuff. I needed to brush up before the pilot class because you get rusty. It doesn't take long to get a little bit rusty and forget those little back-to-basic details. And you need to prepare for this, because this is not a walk in the park, easy thing to do, because there's so many things to keep track of you've got to make sure you're doing all your practicing and getting ready for it, because it's not a checkbox. It's a true test.
All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you for joining us up here. Great conversation. Great SEMA. We're about to wind it down, but again, thanks for joining us up here. Everybody have a good day.
Thank you.